Hello.
Hi there.
Who's speaking?
I'm trying to get ready. I'm Laura. I work with Michelle.
Hi, Laura. How are you?
I'm fine.
Oh, great. Thank you, Nick, for pressing record. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Michelle Drake. I'm with the Marin County Office of Education. Welcome to Ready or Not, preparing our kids to thrive in an uncertain and rapidly changing world with Dr. Madeline Levine. We're thrilled to have you here, Dr. Levine. This webinar is being simultaneously broadcasted in Spanish. There is a interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen if you would like to hear this in Spanish. Thank you to Marta Bitone, who is our interpreter this evening. I'm going to say that now in Spanish. Bienvenidos al programa Listos o No, preparando a nuestros hijos para prosperar en un mundo incierto y rápidamente cambiante, con la doctora Madeline Levine. Este webinar se transmite simultáneamente en español. Haga clic en el botón de interpretación del idioma que aparece en su pantalla si desea escuchar esto en español. Gracias a Marta Bitone, que es nuestra intérprete esta tarde. So you are aware, this webinar is being recorded. So Dr. Madeline Levine, oh my gosh, so much to say. Psychologist with over 35 years of experience as a clinician, consultant, educator, and author. She wrote the New York Times bestseller, The Price of Privilege, Teach Your Children Well, and then her current book is Ready or Not. And all of these are available for purchase. So what we'll do is when I'm done speaking here, I will put that in the chat. There is a 20% discount and free shipping on her 3 books. She is the co-founder of Challenge Success. It's a project of Stanford's Graduate School of Education. And Challenge Success, what they do is they provide families and schools with practical research-based tools to raise healthy, motivated kids capable of reaching to their very, very full potential. She was an elementary and junior high school teacher in the South Bronx of New York before she moved to California, where she earned her master's and her PhD in psychology. However, most outstanding accomplishment, marriage of 40 years to Dr. Lee Schwartz, proud parents of 3 adult sons, and a new gorgeous granddaughter. Honored and privileged to introduce you, Dr. Madeline. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. That was lovely. I appreciate it. I kept hearing you say Ready or Not because that's the title of my book and this talk. And all I could think of was not ready, that nobody was exactly ready by any means for what we've been through the last year. And Ready or Not actually was written before the pandemic, before the kind of political chaos we've had in this country, before the economic collapse. And so I've kept the slideshow partly what I was going to use before, and partly speaking to the issues that we're having now. And no, I wasn't prescient. I had no idea that we were going to have this amount of challenge and uncertainty in our lives. The book was probably written 3 years ago and 2 years ago, came out, and 3 weeks later, we were on lockdown. So preparing kids to thrive, not just kids, it's preparing all of us to thrive in this incredibly, incredibly challenging time. And I'm going to talk about, the book, I'm going to talk about COVID, and I want to keep a couple minutes at the end, and maybe Michelle, somebody can tell me when I have 5 minutes or so left, if I don't hit it, to talk about resilience, because man, do we need that skill set right now. Okay, so let me start. Next slide. So this was from before the world is changing, and we had no idea how much the world was changing. But there's a very particular reason why I wrote this book. So let me explain that. I had written several books before. They were popular. Michelle mentioned challenge success. So I had done an awful lot, and being down at Stanford, I had done an awful lot of investigation about kids and why the science of child development was not really lining up with practices. So, for example, we knew from lots of research how much homework, for example, was optimal for kids. Yet that's not what kids were getting. We knew, for example, that young children really didn't benefit much from any homework, and yet third graders were having an hour of homework. We knew that after 2.5 hours, learning decreases in high school kids, and yet many of the kids in our schools were having 3 and 4 hours of homework. So there was a way in which the message either wasn't getting through or wasn't being framed correctly, but there certainly was an army of people like myself, Wendy Mogul and Ken Ginsberg and Jessica Leahy, and just a dozen people running around the country trying to talk to parents about lowering the academic pressure and paying more attention to some of the other life skills that the psychologist in me knows is critically important. But what happened when I got a little depressed, right? I spent 10 years running around the country saying, don't pressure your kids so much, less homework, more play, character matters more, process, not product and product. So it was a little depressing to see that not only were things not getting better, actually they were getting worse. So when I wrote The Price of Privilege, I think it was maybe 1 in 4 kids who had a mental illness, a diagnosable mental illness. And by the time I wrote Ready or Not, it was 1 in 3. So I didn't succeed in some way. And I got very curious about that. And I'll talk a little later about why I think curiosity is the basis for so much success in life and personally. But anyway, I got curious about it. So instead of talking to my usual suspects, which would be mental health workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and educators, I decided to talk to people who knew a lot specifically about change, because at that point, I'm talking like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, at that point, it was becoming absolutely clear that not just from a psychological point of view, which is very important, but also from the point of view of college admissions and jobs, that there was another skill set that was being neglected. So most of this book, Ready or Not, comes from my conversations with the heads of businesses and the military, because I was looking for people who have been in the middle of change for a long time and sort of know how to optimize the skills that are needed. Psychology is a very slow changing field. You can't see it, but I still have my Freud books up on my bookcase there. And I thought psychology was really slow until I got into education. And then I realized there were professions that were even slower. So I wanted to look for people who had experience with quick change, with needed change. And this is where I found them. I found them as heads of hiring at places like Google and LinkedIn, as 4-star admirals in the military. These are all people who witnessed the need for change. And just to give you an idea, that there's a acronym in my book, VUCA, V-U-C-A, which I don't think is on my slideshow actually, but VUCA stood for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Comes out of the military, out of Afghanistan, but it was adopted by the military and businesses because when things change so radically, for example, in Afghanistan, when you were fighting an entirely different enemy that was nimble and fast and kind of all over the place, that the old hierarchy of, you know, having to go up the ladder to the commander didn't work. I had a great conversation with a man named, Stan McChrystal, who you may or may not know about. He was the runaway general in Rolling Stone. And also with a guy named Sandy Winnefeld, who was the vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And they talked about the fact that the military was always a hierarchical organization. But when your enemy became so fluid, you needed another way. You needed a more horizontal way of communicating. And I heard the same thing from business in the book. I don't think I have it here, but I have a quote from the head of hiring at LinkedIn that says, we can teach skills. What we can't teach is being a good person. And I heard that over and over again in exactly the places where the people that I treat clinically wish their children would be at, where many of the kids that I see wish they would be at. And the skill set that was emphasized over and over again was, you know, like being a good person. That's just an interesting skill set, isn't it? And I'm going to talk about what goes into that. But I have a story for you, which I think I told last time, about when this became real to me, that it wasn't just people trying to sound good. And that's, I live now in San Francisco, but I lived in Marin for 30 years. So I know your community. And when I moved to San Francisco, I went to First Republic Bank to get a loan for my house. And my son, I have 3 sons, there is 3 sons. My youngest son, Jeremy, said, "Oh, can I go with you?" He was a senior in college at that time. And I said, "Sure." So he comes along with me, and I'm in there for about an hour and a half. And I'm talking to the head of the mortgage department. And Jeremy is interested, but he's being who this particular child is, who is very attentive to other people. And so at some point he says to me, "Hey, Ma, I see the meter's expired. Would you like me to put in a quarter?" And I say, "Sure." And another time he says, "You know, your voice sounds scratchy," which it always does. "Can I get you some tea?" And I said, "Sure." And he turned to the head of the department and said, "I see your tea is out. Can I get you some tea?" I mean, it wasn't a lot. It was maybe 3 comments over the course of the hour and a half. And at the end of it, I get my loan, but she turns to my son and she says, "I would like to offer you a job." Now, she knew nothing about him, whether he went to school, whether he went to Harvard or community college or no college. She didn't know what he was studying. She didn't care. And I'm not sure, I think I was more flabbergasted than he was. So, you know, I turned to her and said, "You don't know anything about Jeremy. Why would you want to hire him?" And she said, "Because he's exactly the kind of person I would like sitting next to me in the office. He was thoughtful, he was caring. I can teach him how to do mortgages. I can't teach him to be a good person." And that's about 4 or 5 years ago. By the way, you know, this is like, you never know. So he took a job there when he graduated and hated it so much, hated banking so much, that he is now a lawyer at City Hall instead. So, you know, you don't know, but it was a vivid example to me of the fact that there is a new skill set that we used to think of as soft skills. Well, they're not soft skills. In Ready or Not, I call them foundational skills. They are really the basis of a lot of hiring now, and more importantly, a lot of success in life. So you know, it's a win-win. Okay, so the world is changing. I hope I've convinced you of that, and it has changed far more since COVID. Next slide, please. And fly-in, yeah. And people are having a tremendous amount of difficulty making decisions, figuring out what to do with their kids, figuring out what to do with themselves, because we're all fearful. We're fearful of getting sick. We're fearful of our kids missing developmental opportunities, falling behind. We're fearful of rioting in the country. We are flooded, I would say, with fear. And my 2-second suggestion is, please limit your media exposure. You know where I come from. I can hear it myself. I'm a New Yorker. Your media exposure and your children's media exposure. My first 2 books that nobody ever read was about the media. And the research is so compelling on the fact that the more media, the more scary media you watch, the more you believe the world is a scary place to be in. And it is a scary place to be in right now. So please try and limit that. I've done that myself, and it's easier to get to sleep at night. Okay, so we're flooded with fear, and rightfully so. And fear is what happens when you don't know what the next day, hour, minute is bringing. So what are we fearful of? Next slide, please. I think I've sort of gone over these already. We're fearful of the epidemic. We're fearful of the politics in the country. We're fearful about economic uncertainty, of our children missing the developmentally necessary educational, social, extracurricular opportunities. And we're also afraid of failing, which is something I hear a lot of moms who, by the way, it's young adults and moms of young children who seem to be the most negatively impacted with what's going on. And, you know, the research is just coming in now. So I'm not going to have hard numbers, but I have some numbers on that. But those seem to be the 2 groups that are most distressed. We're afraid that we're going to fail at this. And so this is something that I think is really important. Nobody has done this before, period. Nobody has done this before. We are in uncharted territory for the last 100 years. And so I think when we start to feel overwhelmed and like we're failing, what we need to keep in mind is we're all like babies who have been thrown into the deep end of the pool with no water wings on. Like, we don't know how to do it. And it has been very difficult, and for many people almost impossible, to figure out how to work and, you know, have your kids go to school and cut back on your spending and worry about your job and, you know, walk the dog and cook and all the things that need to be done for most people. So, and I want you to hear this the way I mean it. I think the goal of this period of time is getting through, period. Getting through with your family reasonably intact. And somebody, I gave a talk Friday, and somebody in the audience said, so you have a very low bar for what you expect of parents. And I thought that was fascinating, because I think it's a very high bar. I think getting through this period of time reasonably intact, with your family reasonably intact, is a very high goal. I think it's achievable, but certainly not without an awful lot of struggle. And so if you're worrying about your kid got a B instead of an A, or there's dust bunnies under the bed, or you're not, you know, you're letting the kids eat ice cream don't care. Don't care. If that's what it takes to get through. And obviously, I'm not talking about kids doing destructive things or you doing destructive things. I'm talking about the kind of flexible, regular scheduling that we need to do. And so I'm not going to go over, or maybe I will later, the list of, you know, you should eat and you should sleep and you should meditate and you should have a schedule on your refrigerator, because those schedules, as I understand it, have been put up and ripped and put up again and ripped apart. And I think most people know about those things. I'm going to talk about slightly different things that I think could be helpful. But we need to keep in mind that nobody has practice in this. Resilience, which I will talk about, and everything else I'm going to talk about, things take practice in life. You know, there's that old thing about you could be an expert in 10,000 hours. That's a very particular 10,000 hours. That was brought to you by a Japanese pedometer company who named their thing 10,000 steps or whatever. There's nothing magical about 10,000 steps or 10,000 repeats. The thing is, a good practice means you're not repeating the same thing 10,000 times. You're trying to get better and better by making it slightly more challenging at each time. We've had no practice with this, so you're practicing as you listen to me. And that's difficult under the best of circumstances, when things are easy and your life feels good. And it's still a challenge to learn something. Under these circumstances, it's more difficult. Next slide, please. And why is it more difficult now? I want to give me 2 minutes on brain talk. So the way we're feeling, the anxiety, the depression, the uncertainty, all kind of rest in the part of our brain called the amygdala. And that's the part of the brain that is in charge of aggression, feelings, emotions. It's our, let's think of it as our kind of emotional brain. And unfortunately, it's not really good at decision making or planning or thoughtfulness. That part of the brain that's good at those things we call executive functioning, or EF, executive functioning. That's the prefrontal cortex. And what happens to your brain on uncertainty is everything's going to your amygdala. You can read the things. You see it as a threat. You rush through decisions. You focus only on the stuff you're already familiar with. You become dependent. It is not where you want to be when you are making decisions. And we all have to make decisions. Do our kids go back or not? Do we get a tutor or not? Do we have Wi-Fi or not? I mean, there's just a million decisions. And I think the thing that's really important to understand about the brain is the brain is essentially a prediction machine. The job of the brain is to keep things humming along because it knows what comes next. So you wake up in the morning and you know what time you have to be up, you know what time your kids have to be at school, you know what time school starts, you know which exit to drop them off at, you know where to go for your coffee afterwards. The whole day is a series of predictions that you don't have to think about. And imagine what it would be like if you had to think about what time is school start and where is the school. You know, you would have no energy, no bandwidth left for the challenges of life. So what's happening when you're overwhelmed with uncertainty and things rest in the amygdala as opposed to the prefrontal cortex is you don't think well and you don't make good decisions. And there are workarounds for that. For a minute, I want to talk about where we all are in terms of mental health, and then I'll talk about some workarounds around uncertainty. But before COVID, next slide, please. And again. And again. Thank you. This is before COVID. And we were in the middle of a mental health crisis then. We had 1 in 3 kids with an anxiety disorder. And, you know, that's, I'm not talking about your kid's a little anxious. I'm talking about an anxiety disorder, and what differentiates a disorder from like a character trait is whether or not it impairs functioning. So 1 in 3 kids were impaired by anxiety. 1 in, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1 in 8 was impaired by depression or mood disorder, bipolar disorder. Those were really horrifying numbers 4 years ago. What's happening now, of course, is, next slide, please, is that our early numbers, and these are from the CDC, our early numbers tell us that anxiety is tripling, depression is quadrupling, and suicidal ideation, and I think suicidal ideation has doubled, and I know suicide has gone up by about 25% was what I saw today. But, you know, it's like everything with COVID, the numbers change every day, but these are not going in the right direction. And it's easy to understand why from that 2-minute talk on your brain. You don't function well when things are uncertain, and you're more anxious and you're more depressed. And we can expect to see, I'm extremely concerned that when this is over, whatever that will mean. And I hope it's not back to normal, because there were so many things wrong with normal. You saw the slide before this one. That was not okay to have that high a degree of kids impaired. But when we go back to, you know, not living with as much uncertainty as we're living with now, I have a lot of concern about mental health. I really feel we should be putting together like an AmeriCorps or a Peace Corps or something like that to go out into communities, because kids are going to have had profoundly different experiences through this, everything from barely noticing to having a parent or a grandparent die, parents out of work, parents' mental health is suffering. When parents' mental health suffers, kids' mental health suffers. And I don't think we're really prepared to handle what's going to be coming back into the classroom. One of the things, if there's any teachers listening, I like the idea of having, first go around, having every kid either write out or tell their story. Because I think we have no way when the kids come back of knowing whether they fit into the, you know, toxically traumatized group or did okay group. And there are kids who are doing okay. For some kids, socially phobic kids, or kids who got bullied, not going to school is just fine with them. So we're gonna come back with a profound difference in academic level, emotional level, psychological level. And I think that's a huge job we're going to be asking teachers to handle. So I would, anybody who has connections, I did a small project with Jewish Family and Children's Service of hooking up kids with retired teachers and education students, so that there's a contact person for them to talk to. I'd like to see that on a big scale. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, yeah, 40.9%. That is my last statistic. Let's see where that comes from. That statistic is also from the CDC. Hardest hit, obviously, are people who are in dire economic circumstances, people of color, people, front-facing people who haven't been vaccinated yet, you know, like teachers, and particularly young adults. So I have a steady stream I have a little backyard here, and I have a steady stream of 20 somethings stopping by to say, you know, their life is over and they have no idea what they worked this hard for, and they don't see any point in continuing. And I think the tonic for that, by the way, which I'll get to more, is give them something to do. I think in the haze of what's going on now, we have forgotten that community service, and it can be I spend my whole day on the computer doing telehealth and Zooming. There's plenty to be done for kids, and this is sort of what I think is most helpful for young adults. For adults, I don't know about you, I got so tired of the self-care mantra on a day, you know, today this is an early day, I'll finish at 6 or 6:30 and started at, you know, 8. Self-care is awfully hard to come by. So for some of us, like I don't have kids at home now, so self-care for me is, my husband and I have watched 107 movies since COVID started. I'm a cinephile, I guess. I like movies, and that's what we've done. So I have the luxury of some self-care. For some moms that I talk to, self-care consists of taking a towel and going into the bathroom and screaming in the towel, because there is not a moment in the day that feels like mom owns it. The problem with that is that I can give you all kinds of ideas about what to do with children. The most important one is take care of yourself. Your children will do well in accord with how well you're doing. And if you're not, it is likely that your kids will not do well. So, you know, it's funny, I write all these books on, people think I'm a child psychologist, child and adolescent, which I am. But all my books, well, they look like they're about children, they're really about their parents. Because what we know is that in the course of a normal, healthy family, children do well. The best book I know is called Ordinary Magic by Ann Maston. It's about resilience, which I will talk about. No big, you know, resilience tutors or anything like that. It's like if you take care of yourself and you're doing reasonably well yourself, it is likely, very likely, that your children will do reasonably well as well. And so I want to talk about, you know, that in terms of genetics for a moment. So next slide, please. And I'm going to take a sip of water. People often are under the impression that there's nothing I can do. Alcoholism runs in the family, or anxiety disorders runs in the family, or depression runs in the family. So I want to get us clear on how much of that is science. We psychologists have a phrase that we like. It's genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. There are a few things, but not many, that are purely genetically determined. Mental illness is not one of them. So 30 to 40% of the variance in anxiety disorders is attributable to genetics. Now that may seem like a lot, but that means 60 to 70% of an anxiety disorder expressing itself in your child is environment. Like, let that sink in for a minute. Yes, there are kids who have a predilection for anxiety. Yes, anxiety runs in families. So does depression. So does bipolar disease. However, they are not mandatory or certain or anything like that. They depend in large part on the environment. And if you can fully appreciate that, because parents are often like unhappy about the wrong thing, like, oh, I gave my kid anxiety disorder because my mother had it. But what's more important than that is how you handled, if you had your own anxiety disorder, and the environment that you created for your child in terms of what we call expressing the gene. There's 70% chance that this gene won't be expressed under good circumstances, and 30 or 40% that it will be. And it's very similar, by the way, for depression. Okay, so how do you come up with this better environment? Next slide, please. The first thing, this is going back to you. Before you teach any of this to your child, you have to do a self-check. So the first thing we have to do when we are worked up is to quiet down this limbic system that I talked about. And there's all kinds of suggestions about how to do that. You hear a lot about meditation. You hear a lot about deep breathing. I want you to, I want to say something. So every talk I've given in this past year, which I can't even count anymore, I've talked about meditation. We have a lot of science on meditation and how good it is for quieting the limbic system, getting you in the moment, not being, run around by your feelings. I've talked about it in every single talk because it's got good science behind it. I am unable to do it myself. So, you get a lot of suggestions from people, and there are a lot of things that we do have good scientific evidence on. It doesn't mean it's necessarily good for you. So when you look at a list like this, you have to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. I'm better off reading or taking a walk than I am meditating, but meditation's got good science. Okay, in any event, the idea is you've got to figure out some way to stop being at the mercy of this overwhelming affect that we're all feeling right now. And one of the ways you do that is you figure out what you can and cannot control. And I think one of the things you can do with your children, because nobody is feeling in control right now, is to make sure that you give your kids some choices. And this is something that gets talked about when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. If you have a 3-year-old, it's you want to wear the red pants or the blue pants. Or do you want to go for a walk before dinner or after dinner if your kid's a little bit older? Or you can go out Friday night, but not Saturday night. We like choices, and we like to feel that we have some control over our life. And there are parts of this you have no control over, period. And I think we are all getting a life lesson in the fact that we really didn't have that much control all along. I mean, after talking to hundreds and hundreds of schools around the country in the last few years, and around the world, actually, people think they have so much more control than they actually do. All the carrying on about which class, I don't like that teacher, or I don't like, the way she teaches, or my kid wants to be in a class with a best friend, or not. We think we have control over outcomes, and we don't often in the ways we think are important. I feel like the things we often consider important around our children are, at the end of the day, kind of trivial, and the things that really are important, we're not paying enough attention to. So I have a whole chapter in Ready or Not on what I'm calling accumulated disability. And I think it's an important concept. Accumulated disability is what happens to kids when they are accommodated too easily and too frequently. So my favorite story is the young lady in that community, because that's where I practiced for many years, who didn't like sauce. And she just would not eat her food if it had sauce on it. So her mom really went out of her way to make sure there was never any sauce on her food. And then she got a little older and would go over to other kids' houses, and mom would have to call that mom and say, please don't cook sauce because my daughter doesn't eat sauce. And then she went away to camp and had to call the camp and tell them, and the camp was not in the least bit interested in this. But the constant accommodation to a normal developmental challenge, like kids have all kinds of likes and dislikes growing up, got in the way of this kid having sleepovers, being invited to parties, all kinds of stuff. Mom thought she was helping her out by attending to her anxiety. And I'd like to make the case that those levels of anxiety are critical for resilience, You don't know what you can and cannot do until you have practiced it, back to practice. So accumulated disability ends up hobbling kids. And I think it's one of the reasons why the 20-year-old is having so much difficulty, because the normal developmental challenges have been taken care of for them. I mean, the number, I'd say the two most common I see are my kid can't sleep. So sleeping in my room, he's sleeping in my bed. And full disclosure, my youngest son, Jeremy, the one that got the job at the bank, he slept in my room till he was probably 7. So did it ruin him? No. And I think it's important to understand that professionals make mistakes, and kids are unbelievably resilient and can forgive parents for just about anything. So you will make some mistakes. I think the thing is not to have it be a pattern. So yeah, Jeremy slept upstairs. I was exhausted. I had 3 boys and a career. My husband was the surgeon. He was out a lot of the time. I just didn't have the bandwidth on that one. I did on other ones, but not on that one. So you don't want this to be a pattern. The other one I get a lot of is barking dogs. The kid's walking home from school and is frightened by a dog bark, and mom then decides they're going to walk another way, or she'll take the child to school. Those are wrong. Don't do that. And the reason you don't do that is the way we learn to deal with challenge is by having developmentally manageable challenges that on our own we're able to master. I think if you're going to step in any way, it's around, too many AP courses, too much emphasis on GPA. I don't know if they still do it. My kids were all raised in Marin, and it used to drive me out of my mind. They went to Redwood, and there was the listing of GPA and colleges they went to. And I probably spoke at those schools a half a dozen times, and I couldn't get it to change because people thought that was really important. That's not what's important. Those are the places you ought to step in and say, I think one more AP is not that critical. I don't think it's a good idea for you. But the dog, walk with your child, but don't eliminate the challenge, because they will then not be able to walk, and then they will be teased by their friends, and then they will have less friends, and then they will feel less capable. So it's this spiral. I just gave it the name accumulated disability, but it's a spiral of not feeling competent. Don't dwell on negative emotions. There are days that's hard not to do, but it doesn't help us. The eat well, exercise, sleep, and keeping to a schedule, man, we have just a bunch of research telling us how important those things are when people are under stress. And the trying to keep a schedule is interesting, I think. Think about your own life and what part of your day, if it exists, can you not change? So what I've gotten through COVID and will keep in my life when I can move around more is I have a quiet breakfast every morning with a cafe mocha. And that has become an incredibly important touchstone for me. Like nothing gets in the way of that. What's his name? The astronaut Kelly, he's now the senator from Arizona, had a terrific article about how critical keeping a schedule was when he was in space for a year, as a way of marking time and feeling that something's accomplished during a day. And I think it's a good idea, if you can, to have a couple of things in your life that feel like a routine for you. I have one family where everybody does some meditation before sleep. The entire family does, and they have found that incredibly helpful. So some kind of family activity is probably a good idea. All right, next slide, please. These are the things that I think really count. What we have to parent for, what we have to educate for. Critical thinking is incredibly important, because I think what we're seeing in this country is a lack of critical thinking. That's being kind. Critical thinking is about, how do you know that? Where'd you get that information from? That's interesting. I wonder how else you could see that. And out of that ability to take different perspectives, you get empathy. And empathy, I think, falls into that category of, I want to hire your son, he's a good person, because he was empathic in that meeting. So I think these are, by the way, these are all teachable skills. Resilience is teachable. I said I'd talk about resilience for a few minutes. This is as good a time as any to talk about it. People have, I think, the wrong idea about empathy. I think empathy and resilience are, you're not born that way. You have the capacity for, let's take resilience. You're born with the capacity for resilience. And then your environment does or does not help you develop that. The same with any of these things, I think. Yeah, I'd say purpose too. We're born pretty much wanting to do something that means something. But I think people tend to think of resilience as an all or nothing phenomena, like that's a resilient kid. There is no gene for resilience. A person can be incredibly resilient in one situation and not in another. And the skills that comprise resilience, and some of them are here: empathy, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, optimism is another one, hope is another one. These are all well-researched components of resilience, and they can all be taught, right? And so much of it depends, we have some time now. So much of it depends on where you put your energy. Is it, how'd you do? Are you caught up? Are you falling behind? Do you need a tutor? What's going to happen with college? Or you can have your dinner conversation be, the example I gave on critical thinking, why that school, where'd you get your information from? What's another perspective? Can you give me a theory that you put together? Not a theory, a hypothesis that you put together on this? And helping kids get into another pair of shoes, somebody else's shoes, will stand them in great stead as a child in terms of popularity. Empathic kids are popular, but also as a son or a daughter, and also as a partner when they grow up. So I think we need to think about resilience in a very different way. We need to think about it in terms of whether or not what we're spending our time on is cultivating resilience and get out of the headset that resilience, kids are either resilient or not. It just doesn't work that way. And there's a whole bunch of research to back that up. Okay, so I think these are important. The thing about purpose, I think, is critical, because I think many of us have, kind of lost, like, what the hell are we doing? We don't even know what we're doing anymore. And one way to talk back to that is to know that you have something to do for somebody else every day, every week, whatever it is. And that you expect your children as well to be able to articulate what's meaningful to them and to do something about it. Just having, like, empathy is not just, oh, I feel for you. It's, I feel for you and I'd like to do this for you. I'd like to help you in this way. I'd like to talk to you. So we move from sort of emotional empathy resonance to behavioral empathy, which is what really matters. Okay, next slide, please. The other thing I like doing now, because I'm a writer, is I think this is an astounding time, a historical time, and a time that will be in the history books. If you have young children, they will be reading about this time. And we've all had different experiences. We've had deaths, we've had births, we've had all kinds of losses. And I think it's useful to think about the story that you want to tell about this time. Think about it as the story you want to tell your children and the story you want to tell your grandchildren. And I think it's a great exercise. The kids I talk to like doing this. They like two things. They like a book of questions. So there are no answers in that book. It's like, what did I do? And why did this happen? And what will it be like? And just all the questions that are bubbling through them. And the other is, what's the story you want to tell? What's the legacy of this going to be for you? And I think one of the things you need to do as you think about this is to kind of like reach into your toolbox of skills. By the time we're adults, most of us have had challenge and sadness and loss, and divorce and illness, a lost parent, financial distress, and that's life. And one of the things we should be able to do at this point is have a toolbox that serves us under those circumstances. So for me, my dad died when I was a teenager. It was incredibly difficult. We were on welfare. And that's when I started writing. And that's my go-to. That's been my go-to this whole year. It's always my go-to in terms of challenge. One of my best friends is a runner. She's got a problem, she goes out and runs. And we were talking about the fact that we're a year into this. You can't write 18 hours a day, you can't run 18 hours a day. And I think it's a really important exercise to think about what it is that you might be able to add to your toolbox as kind of a secondary skill, and to help your kids, right? I keep getting telephone calls like, one of my kids, just wants to be left alone in their room and the other one wants to cuddle. And it's like, yeah, right. Everybody has ways of dealing with trauma and stress. And one of your jobs is to know your own child's skill set for dealing with difficult circumstances and to respect that. So for the child who works through things by themselves, don't keep going in and saying, how are you? How are you? And for the child who just wants to cuddle up to you, don't say, oh, can you tell me more about how you're feeling? Like, respect your child's way of coping with things. I was just talking about resilience. The bedrock of resilience is attachment, is the parent-child relationship. I told you the name of my favorite book is Ordinary Magic. No big deal. you are empathic with your child, you listen to your child, you empathize with them, you are disappointed with them. Listen, one more little story because my time's almost up. My oldest boy, who's also a lawyer now, Lauren, I remember I was once upset about something or another, and he was like, you know, the easy child. Don't tell them I said that because they hate it. And so he said to me, "You're disappointed in me, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "That is the worst thing you could ever say to me." And I've played back and forth with that over the years, whether that's a mistake or not. And I don't think so, you know, after thinking about this for the last 15 years. I think that setting expectations, you know, we know that authoritative parenting is the best kind of parenting. You have a lot of love and you also have expectations and limits. And I don't think you use disappointment a lot, but when a child doesn't meet expectations that they're capable of, I think, and you have to know your child, of course. I think that that's an okay thing to do. So the biggest thing you will be doing to help yourselves and your children get through this is to be attuned to them and to be attuned to yourself and to be respectful of that. I think it's an incredibly important time to do a couple of things. Next slide, please. Talk less and listen more. I'm a psychologist. I don't remember, she said 35 or 40 years. It's almost 40 years. And I have never, ever had a child come into my office and say, you know, my parents, they just listen too much. Like that doesn't happen, right? It's always my parents don't listen. And that's because listening is like a skill we don't cultivate, right? Your child starts talking and you're already thinking about the answer to it. So what we call active listening, really, really important. And you know, all the things God gave you, 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I think it's really helpful to just sit back without anticipating your response and listen to what your kid has to say. I put get outside and move. I could have said write. I could have said make a diary. I could have said bake. Do something that is nurturing for yourself and that we have data on. So even long before COVID, you know, the first order of defense for depression is exercise. So we know that moving around helps to attenuate, lessen bad feelings, bad moods. And the last one's model self-care, which of course I just told you was that's not my feed, but it could be. Model self-care. I have my cafe mocha every morning, no matter what. Okay, the next one, please. And this is the time to reset. And I think in this respect, it's an amazing opportunity. If things go back the way they were before the pandemic, it will be a waste of a pandemic. Education, I mean, I work at Challenge Success. Education has so many issues that need tweaking. Time school starts, the project-based versus not project-based learning, alternate assessment, the kinds of things we do at Challenge Success. This is an opportunity to reset some of it. It's also an opportunity to reset ourselves. And I suspect I'm not the only one who has worked incredibly hard, love what I do, but I will cut back. I'm trying to decide if it's 10 or 15% when I can, because I'm always running around and often I didn't get to have that cup of coffee quietly in the morning, and I'm going to have that now. So think about the way that you would like to see your own life reset now and as we go forward. And the last slide, anybody who has seen me talk knows I always close with it. While we all hope that our children will do well in school, we hope with even greater fervor that they will do well in life. Our job is to help them know and appreciate themselves deeply, to be resilient in the face of adversity, to approach the world with zest, to find work that is satisfying, friends and spouses who are loving and loyal, and to hold a deep belief that they have something meaningful to contribute to the world. And I've always used this as, this is a successful child, you've been a successful parent. I don't think that's changed. Pandemic, political craziness, I think that's still a good measure of success. Okay, I am right on time.
Wow, Dr. Levine, thank you so much. You always just put such ease in our rapidly moving minds as adults. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So I
Sure.
just want to remind everyone that we are recording this and it will be available on our website. I'll put that link in the chat, but we're also going to email it to all of the different participants. And of course, all of Dr. Levine's books are available for purchase, and I'll put that in the link or in the chat as well, the code for the discount and the free shipping. So
Thank you.
this is the point where we can start our questions. So I have a clarifying question to start,
Sure.
and that is, and so as our guests, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to reach all of them. So the first clarifying question was, from the beginning of your presentation, you were sharing data around the high rise in anxiety among people. Was that teens, adults, or who was captured in that data?
In the first one
I
with the
think it
X,
was like the
yeah,
X's, yes.
those were teenagers. Sorry.
Teenagers. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I couldn't recall, and I was doubting myself after I thought it was teens.
right.
Okay. Thank you
And
for that.
I just want to clarify something about that, because it's a good question and it's an important point, because people are always saying, you know, mental health is falling apart and everything's getting worse. The reality is that it's those two arenas, depression and anxiety, that are seeing really big upticks. And they are more dependent on environment than some other mental illnesses. Yeah.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So next question, how do you teach optimism or unteach pessimism?
So I love that question, because I'm a pessimist by nature. And I've read every book that Seligman has written, because he writes about optimism, you know, he's positive psychology, and it's helped some. I don't think you're going to turn a pessimistic child into Susie Sunshine. I don't think so. But I think you can. First of all, anything you teach your child mostly comes from how you approach the world. So if you're sitting every day going, you know, God, that sucked and that was awful, and then you're teaching your child a particular point of view. If you um, highlight the things that, you know, this is a really difficult time now, but you have time with your children, and you have time to reset, and you have time to think about what really matters to you. If you fall on that side of the equation, you model it for your children. And also, I think it's embedded in the kinds of questions you ask.
Mm.
I had a fight with so-and-so, you know, and you're empathic, and like, tell me what you learned from that. Was that a good thing to learn? Did you feel better about learning it? Rewarding your child's empathy. Kids are quite empathic. They want to give money to somebody they see on the street, or buy a lunch or a banana or whatever. You know, I think that was wonderful. I think you gave that person a little bit of hope in the world. So I think, you know, what you attend to, I used to go to people's houses, like for dinner, to see what the discussions were about. Because people would say, no, I don't push my child ever. I don't, you know, that's not me.
Mm.
And so I'd have dinner once in a while with them, and, you know, they didn't push their child. But what was dinner conversation? The guy down the block who just got a new Tesla, or who has a internship at Goldman Sachs. It's what you pay attention to in your house that sends the message. Yeah.
What shifts in the classroom could teachers make to create a sense of belonging and an environment that quiets that limbic system?
For the teachers out there, I have nothing but admiration for you. I was a teacher for 5 years. It was the hardest job I ever had by a long shot. So kudos. And my kids went through the education system in Marin, and it was terrific. What can you do to quiet kids down? I actually think in a classroom, bringing in some physical, because kids learn by doing. So bringing in some simple things, young kids, you have a thermometer. How are you feeling today? How can, John is feeling sad. How do we make him feel better? Bring the kids into the process of helping each other. Let them tell their story. I think getting that story is going to be critical for the kid, but also for you as the teacher to know, like, what you're dealing with. I have, and I don't have 20 or 30 kids. I have half a dozen or a dozen, and some of them are positively out of their minds with anxiety, and some of them are very depressed, and I don't know that ahead of time. So whatever I thought was going to be problematic, sometimes I'm right, and just as often I'm wrong. So I need to listen to the kid's story. That's one of the things I think.
This is an interesting, can you, in relation to anxiety, is it possible to unteach anxiety?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what the hell? I had an anxiety disorder for many years, a severe anxiety disorder. And there are medications, and there is something called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that are overwhelmingly successful in treating anxiety disorders. Now, anxiety disorders tend to show up in families where other people have anxiety disorders, like I said, 30 to 40%. So part of it is getting you as the parent to get your own anxiety under control. But, what we do in the office with anxiety is really teachable, this cognitive behavioral therapy. So in a nutshell, what do? The kid comes in and they're convinced that something comes into their room at night. And you say, okay, how anxious does that make you? There's something in my closet. That's a 10. Okay. And then you start the critical thinking. Any other idea about what that could be? You're not trying to talk the kid out of it. Any other ideas? What's your evidence for that? What makes you think it's a monster instead of the wind? You give them alternate solutions, and you see if by exposing them to ideas about what they're anxious about, if you can little by little. So in the office, it takes, 6 to 12 months, 6 to 12 weeks, sorry. And most people, including myself, have stopped teaching this to the child and instead are teaching the parent how to do it. So it's not just 1 hour a week in my office. The parent can do it with the child as it comes up. And it's really, get on Google and find, a parenting CBT book. It's really easy and it's incredibly successful. And the younger you start with that, and this is what's, kind of tragic about our not attending to mental health problems. Like I said, that's something 6 weeks, I can really turn a kid around if they're 8. If they're 18, they've probably started using substances to, it's a lot more complicated. So if you think that's what's going on, ask your pediatrician, ask somebody who knows the kid, talk to your kid and see if you can start teaching them how to evaluate their anxiety. And last point, they will not be anxiety free. They will not be the person who has no anxiety ever. They will have some. Your job is teaching them to manage it.
And the tools, what strategies and tools.
Right.
What are your thoughts on encouraging critical thinking with our kids?
You know what I like for critical? I like the media, because kids love the media. They love video games. They love movies. They like, they like social media. One of the best projects I ever saw was at a school called Millennium in San Francisco, where the kids were put in charge of coming up with guidelines for media and social media use. Parents were pushing and pushing and pushing, and the kids were pushing back. They weren't getting anywhere. So they handed it over to the kids, and they gave them 3 months, which is a long time, to research this and go into these small discussion groups around where'd you get that from and what's your evidence and is there another point of view and what is it, you know, what's the middle of this? And the kids ended up with a protocol that was actually more stringent than the parents had wanted, and they kept to it for the year. It was an amazing success. And I think, you know, it's hard to teach critical thinking when your kid's not interested in the subject matter. So you take what they're interested in and you get interested with them, and you know, you make it fun and you explore, and I think one of the critical things is, you know, what are other points of view? Because when I heard from hiring people, it was always about an open mind and perspective taking. That came up all the time. That's one way to learn to have an open mind and take perspective. Yeah.
Well, and those students, that agency and ownership over their learning is so important. Just the values that they took from doing that was pretty incredible. Other book recommendations, you had referenced Ordinary Magic.
Yeah.
Other book recommendations besides yours?
For
Anxiety and parenting during,
yes,
yeah.
so I like Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson's book. My favorite's probably Michelle Borba's book that comes out this week called Thrivers. And it is about helping kids to thrive. She and I are very good friends. We sound a lot the same. She's smarter than I am. And that's an outstanding book. The book before that was called Unselfie, and that was about empathy. Those are a couple of, and I like, for teenagers, I like Lawrence Steinberg's The Adolescent Brain. I thought that was groundbreaking to truly understand that teenagers are not capable of the kind of thinking that we think they are. When a kid says, this is a lifetime of being a psychologist, when a kid is in my office and got picked up for drunk driving or shoplifting or whatever it is, and the kid, and I'm asking them, what were you thinking? And they said, I wasn't, or I don't know. Now I take them at their word. They weren't thinking and they didn't know. And I think one of the hardest parts of being a parent is co-regulation, right? That's easy when your child is really young. They go to step off the curb, you yank them back. The only time I ever potched my kids on the behind was then, when they try to get into the street. We co-regulate, and it's not that hard to figure out because we know that young children don't have the self-regulation skills to be safe in the world. It gets a lot harder in adolescence when kids are constantly pushing for autonomy and agency and efficacy, and we still have a role to play in co-parenting with them. One of the greatest predictors of a healthy adolescent is a parent who monitors their kid. Your kid won't like it. That's the way, that's too bad. It's a good predictor. Monitor, not control, you know, not be authoritarian, but know where your kid is, what they're doing, who they're with. Been shown to be a really good predictor.
So the next question is, it's a challenging time right now, and our hope is to continue moving through it, etc. The worry is that her teen is developing bad habits in the meantime. Any ideas on how to help our kids get through this time in a healthy way, and how do we get them to reset and unlearn those bad habits?
Right. So, you know, that's a problem, and it goes back to, there's a difference if your kid's at home or not at home. I still think that modeling community involvement and expecting your kid to be involved in the house, to have chores, to be responsible for things, and again with flexibility. So somebody called me once and said, my daughter starts the day at 9, but she doesn't get up until 9. And I said, well, then the day starts at 9:15. I mean, you have to sort of decide what you're going to go to the mat for. You go to the mat for substance abuse, which is skyrocketing now. Opioid use is skyrocketing. I was just reading, New York Times had an article on opioid abuse. It is just crazy right now. So you want to make sure that your kids are, those kinds of habits you want to be aware of and intervening with. But I think they're watching a little more TV than you'd like, or a little more screen time. Remember, with screen time, the point was what is being forced out by too much screen time. This was before COVID. So we were, all of us was saying, well, it shouldn't be too much screen time, because then they're not face to face, and they're not developing social skills, and they're not making decisions and stuff like that. They can't do that now anyway. So if your kid is on social media all day, that's a bad idea. If your kid is on social media an hour more than you would like them to be now, I don't care. We're all trying to get through. Remember, it's get through the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
And, if it's an older kid, then you have a discussion with them, and you express your concerns, and you co-regulate, co-parent with them about how they can get through this better. I think one of the things I did with my own kids, and I thought it was a good idea, you go into that toolbox. Honey, when you're feeling lousy, what do you do? What makes you feel better? You've seen mom, I'm always reading a book. What do you do? How can I help you with that? Is that doing it for you now? What else can we add to it? These are all, a lot of people are feeling a lot more connected in their families as a result of this. And of course, there's a huge amount of fighting and disgust and anger also being, especially for kids who are 20 something, because their brains are telling them, I don't belong here. They are programmed not to be in the house with you. So it's going to be difficult, but I mean, I'm just a big believer in talking about things without pushing them.
So in your new book, towards the end, you had mentioned that we need to be teaching our children to think and reflect more at a younger age around ethics and technology and government and democracy. Today we are moving toward building in a more equally education in our schools. What do you say to parents who push against that equity conversation?
Frankly, I want to know why. I want to know what they think. I mean, people have a million different reasons for pushing. And I don't know how many of you saw it. There was an article about Condé Nast yesterday. Apparently I'm Jewish, somebody had written an article entitled How to Actually Make a Good Hamantaschen, which is a Jewish cookie that's not very tasty. And anyway, there was backlash against it because the woman wasn't Jewish who wrote it. And so Condé Nast, as a result, is going back through all of its recipes to make sure that they are whatever, politically correct. So sometimes people are opposed for reasons that I want to hear more about that make sense to me. I think when people in general are opposed to issues of equity or social justice, it's out of fear. And I think, we have research that tells us that arguing doesn't do it, right? You cannot talk somebody out of their tribe or out of their belief about their tribe. That's a really hard thing to do. So my approach to that, and I do it a lot, is to try and get more information. Maybe I can get to a point where somebody will talk about the fear behind their opposition. And if I can get to that point, then there's some chance of getting more buy-in. But you know, it's a very hot political topic right now. Most of us want to see more equity and more social justice, but I also think we have to teach what that means. And I think it's interesting. My kids, and I bet this is true, my kids are millennials. Millennial kids are like all over this. They're values driven. I don't see them as a spoiled, entitled group. I see them as active and values driven. And they're educating me, because it's very different from the way I was brought up. And I think for us, it is a fabulous opportunity to stop and listen and look at some of our own biases, which, you know, we all have, and to appreciate the different perspectives on this, while still, you know, supporting attempts to have a more equitable classroom, school, community. And I just want to say something about that in terms of everything I've talked about, but resilience in particular. Where system upon system, I'm a psychologist, so the system I'm most familiar with is the individual system. You know, what strength does this kid come with? What weaknesses does this kid have? How reflective are they? But they are situated in a system, and that system is their family, right? So more and more of the work, I said earlier, like, I don't treat kids myself with CBT anymore, I treat the family. So you've got the kid, and then you've got the family, and then you've got the education system around that. And then you've got the community around that. And in the best of all possible worlds, you want a resilient kid. All of those systems are working well. And we have to be concerned with all of those systems, because you can have a kid who has built their resilience muscle. And if the school, you know, is not interested in their creative ideas and doesn't want to know about anything except whether they got into a stellar university or not, you can break the resilience in that kid. So we want our kids healthy, we want our families healthy, we want our schools, we want our communities.
So this is in reference to high school and standardized testing that is going optional due to the pandemic, and the surge of applications to many of the top tier colleges because of the testing is optional. Colleges seem to be focusing that much more on the rigor of students' academic record. As a parent, how would you deal with that becoming a much more critical criteria in the college admissions process without creating undue stress and pressure on a high school student?
This is when I know I'm old. And I've been doing this for a long time. When your children are grown, all of this concern and worry will seem so far away and so distant. You want your kid to get into a good school. You want learning to be fun. You know, I didn't use the term lifelong learner, but that's the deal, because their jobs are going to change and change and change again. So learning has to be active and fun. It's why we do project-based learning in all the challenge success schools. I think that you stay away from the things that I've heard over the years. You don't take that course because you're not good at it and it'll bring your GPA down. Or my youngest son, Jeremy, who is totally a hands-on learner, and Redwood, not to badmouth Redwood, they got a great education, but Redwood would not, he's just turned 30. Redwood would not accept the hands-on classes as part of their GPA. So, you know, I carried on for quite a few years about that, but that was probably not really helpful to my son, because it made it seem like, well, this course doesn't matter unless they count it. So I'm assuming that you, as a parent of a high school student, more critical criteria. I wouldn't really change anything about the way you're parenting. Most important part of parenting is, will your kid come to you if they have a problem? Is your kid kind? Does your kid have relationships that are healthy? I can promise you, it always sounds ridiculous. My husband always says, when somebody says, trust me, don't trust them. But trust me that that those are the things that you will care about, and not their GPA.
So amazing, so important. So I think this might be our last question, but parental burnout during the pandemic. We are all spent, we are ready for COVID to just be done and go away.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts for?
I was reading an article today, and my husband's a surgeon, on burnout among doctors. And, a lot of burnout is the lack of choices. Like, you don't have any choice. If your kid's at home and you're working in the next room and all hell's breaking loose and they're fighting, and we don't have choices. And that this article was about how that is feeding this sense of burnout and endlessness of, I think I actually have this theory, which is people have been more depressed lately, to me, or at least I'm getting more phone. It's hard to believe, but I'm getting more phone calls lately than I was 6 months ago. And so I'm puzzling over this because we're getting close, we've got the vaccine. Marin just went down a tier. Teachers are vaccinated. Like, why are people having an even harder time? And I have no idea if this is true or not, but I think, at least it was for me, when the election came and Biden won, I thought, great, it was saved. And when the vaccine came and I've had my shot, that's it, it's over, good. And then I woke up the next morning after both of those things and nothing had changed. I still had to put on my mask. I still couldn't see my kids in the same way. And I think that's part of the burnout now, is that we're this close to it, but we're not there yet. And I know for me personally, it was like, this is going to be great now. I'm going to feel great. Life hasn't changed very much. It will. And I'm very much in a medical community. They are getting closer and closer. The rollout is going to speed up. We have every reason to be optimistic in spite of our exhaustion. It's coming.
Yeah, it's coming. Okay, well, I would be remiss if I did not speak about our awesome high school wellness speaker series that I've been working on with our really amazing students here in Marin County. It's a high school student wellness speaker series. We have various talks on empowering student choices, suicide prevention, LGBTQ students uniting, coming together with advocacy, mindfulness through movement, digital wellness with common sense media. That is going to be incredible. I'm excited for, they're all really amazing. I'm excited about this one because it is around social media and your own identity and who you want to represent yourself with. And then substance use with the RX Marin and the SPAR Center. So, Dr. Levine, you are incredible. We are so appreciative to have your voice and to have your expertise this evening during this crazy time.
It's interesting. The county did really well by my kids. And so I'm always going to feel a connection with you guys.
Thank
Anytime.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we'll be in touch. Thank you everyone for joining us. Appreciate you
Bye.
being here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.